Pastor Daughtry, thanks for being here with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a story about Kamala and the VP's faith. Tell us a little bit about kind of how you know her, kind of your interactions with her, just kind of overall, and what's the background there?
Sure. Well, we met about 20 years ago. I was working on the convention, Democratic convention, and she called, and we started a conversation that continues till today. That particular point, we were talking about convention logistics and what she should expect and, you know, all of that sort of thing, because she was trying to figure out when she was coming herself. And I was the CEO, and I was impressed that it was her calling. I think she was DA at that time, and not a staff person calling us, you know, it's another staff person. So we became friendly and talked regularly, and that's lasted over 20 years.
You know, in politics, there's always narratives that everybody wants to create and, you know, misconceptions. So talk to me a little bit about her faith, the way you understand it, if there's been any conversations with her about it, or just stories, anything that you want to add that would kind of give people a sense of what drives her, especially from a faith perspective.
I have found her to be a woman of deeply held values and convictions that are really rooted in her faith. When we first met, it wasn't in a context of talking about our faiths. Of course, everybody knew that I was a pastor. But over time, you know, as she talked about it more and I listened to her talk about the things that drive her and what's important to her, then I got the biography about growing up in 23rd Avenue Church of God, which is mirrors my own tradition. So I said, okay, tell me more about that. So I learned, you know, that's where her mother took her and her sister Maya when they were growing up. And that's where she grew up, in that kind of environment. She sang in the children's choir. She loved going to the studies and listening to the preacher talk about the Bible and scripture. So she came to understand God as a loving God who loves his creation and wants to see the best for all of us. And that really has been the undergirding of so much of her life. As we know, she's only ever been in public service, that the government has only ever been her job, and it's really because she feels that the government has a role to play in helping people achieve their dreams and achieve the things that we would call in church their God-given destiny and their the things that God, the life of prosperity and the life of wholeness. So she would say that, you know, government has a role. And so whether it's helping people to buy their first homes, or whether it's helping children to go to good schools, which then gives them the foundation to become whoever they want to be, it's really grounded in those early lessons that she learned in church, going every Sunday, as you know, we do in that tradition.
Yeah, for sure. So it feels like a social justice gospel, a compassion. How would you term it? I mean, you know, I know we hear about Matthew 25 a lot, and kind of like that idea. Is that seems to be the prism. I know when I spoke with Barack Obama years ago, you know, is the better angels, love thy neighbor, take care of your fellow man, that type of thing.
That's exactly it. It's, you know, how do you see your fellow human being as someone created by God and therefore entitled, due the respect, the honor of a God-breathed individual. So how do you make decisions that support? How do you make decisions that help people be their best selves? And how does government play a role in that? Or should it, or does it? And she believes that it does. And it should be a help and not a hindrance to your dreams and your fulfilling whatever it is you want to have, your version of the American dream. So I don't know if I put a label on it as social justice gospel, as much as how do you help people thrive?
Right. No one's into taking church attendance for sure, but what do you think about just her being active in her faith? I mean, what's your sense of that, knowing her now after 20 years?
Yeah, she's as active as she can be when you are traveling as much as she travels, but she stays connected to her pastor, who's Amos Brown. She and I talk often, we pray together. I give her scriptures and devotionals, and so she's really connected and feels a sense of not obligation or duty, but a desire to be closer and to grow her relationship with God, and that's just as a pastor. myself gratifying when you meet people like that.
I'm sure the conversations and the prayers will stay private, but what about more the pastoral guidance, if you will, in those moments with her? What's kind of your charge to her, or at least what you would want her to take away from some of those more intimate conversations spiritually?
You know, what I encourage her to do is to follow her faith and follow the teachings of her faith and what she learned, which is that every person is a representative and a reflection of the divine creator. So do what you know to do, do what is right to ensure that that person is respected, gives respect and gets respect, and is able to live the life that we believe that God created for them. And so I'm not into giving her political advice unless she specifically asks me for it, but it's just a conversation between two sisters who love each other. And as a pastor, then, you know, how's your prayer life? How you doing? Everything good? What do you need? How can I pray for you in this moment? And that's all I'll say about that.
What is more of that prayer for her in this moment? In other words, she's going through a lot. Both sides are going through a lot. This is an intense time in America. Do you sense a burden, not in a bad or a good way, just do you sense a heaviness that she carries through this? Or help me through that a little bit.
I think she feels a burden to act upon her values and her principles. I think she feels a burden to help people's lives feel better. I think she's driven to pursue policies, to pursue work, to see people in the time of their need, in the time of their crisis, in the everydayness of their lives and the challenges that we face, whether you got huge challenges or whether it's just, I got to get my kid to school today. What's for lunch? All of those things, and the God that she believes in is about things small and large, right? We believe He cares about small things and large things. That's the God that she prays to. And so in this moment, she's driven by her beliefs and what she thinks God is requiring of her in this moment, which is to, she likes Micah 6:8. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
Very nice. I remember you saying something in an interview about Barack Obama, that was a historic moment when he was elected, or the choice that he was going to be potentially president, and called it a God moment, I think is what you said. And I believe, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you also said this is a similar God moment. Is that true? And if so, what did you mean by that?
I think it is rather a God moment. And the circumstances in which she became the nominee, I don't think any of us could have predicted a year ago. It certainly wasn't the plan. And so much of what happens in our lives is never the plan. It's always God's intervening. The old people in my church used to say, man plans and God disciplines. So this is a God disciplining moment. And just in the space of, what has it been? Has it been 2 months? July, August, September, just over 2 months. She's become the nominee of the party and has run a spectacular campaign that we weren't prepared for, we hadn't imagined. Our path was in a particular direction, and then just like that, and isn't that how God works? Just like that, things switch. And here she is, and she stepped into a moment that she was prepared for, that obviously she had been getting ready for, or was being made ready, so that when the moment opened, she was able to step through that door.
This isn't an interview about Donald Trump, but on the God moment thing, and I'm sure you don't want to take up too much headspace thinking about if Donald Trump becomes president, but if he does, how do you reconcile that? I mean, not to call that a God moment, but God is in control of all things. So how do you kind of maybe pastorally, spiritually kind of see that? What if Donald Trump becomes president again after everything that's been going on? I mean, some people are going to look up and go, really?
And I'll be one of those. Really? I think if that happens, then, my faith would say, okay, now what do I do? Now how is God speaking in this moment, if this is what God has allowed, then I can't dwell on that. I got to be ready for the moment that I'm in. And so I think all of us who are people of deep faith, who would say that Trump winning is not what we would have wanted, would pivot to the next moment. So what do we learn from this? How do we prepare, and what do we do with the people that we serve whose lives are going to be impacted by the policies of a new administration that may not be what we anticipated, that may not be favorable? How do we serve? How do we still pray to this God whose decision we do not understand? And that's really about our walk with faith. And do you still continue to hold the faith? As folks in my, can you trust God when you can't trace God? When you can't trace the decision and understand the decision, how does that impact your faith? It shouldn't, although we're allowed to question. Sure. But you just keep moving, and my priority would be the people that I'm called to serve. What is their life going to be like, and how do I support them through this moment?
Let me go back to 23rd Avenue, kind of like the Black church, right? Or the Black church experience, as some people call it. You know, take us into that. How does that shape her values, her worldview? You know, educate folks so people understand where she's coming from exactly.
So I'll say the Black church experience, because the Black church is a particular collection of historic churches.
Yes.
So in the Black church experience, it's personal. Mm-hmm. You know each other. You know people's names. You know their circumstances. You know their mother's names. You come as a family unit. And if you come by yourself, you make family at the church. So there's sisters Sally and brother Jim, and everybody is part of a family, and it's a deeply emotional experience. And I don't mean that by meaning demonstrative, although some of us do have demonstrative faith. I'm Pentecostal, so yes, the music and the vibrancy and the emotion is just part of the experience.
Give yourself a tambourine. Yeah, I got you.
I'm a good tambourine player. But it's about how you connect in that moment away from the challenges of the week, which for many in the Black church experiences is not positive. You're dealing with racism, you're dealing with being diminished, demeaned, dismissed through a society that doesn't often see you or value your contribution. Church is where all of that goes away. And in that experience, we know we are with people who've had the same sort of challenges through the week, and we can come and express our faith in a creator God who doesn't see or care about our race, or who sees our race and loves it and made us in this skin. And so we don't have to worry about whether I'm being charged more in a store, whether the police are going to stop me, stop and frisk, whether I'm getting the right kind of health care. We're just all in one place together, this family of our church, where we can be all of who we are. As God created us.
So that's interesting. So it's really community-based, from a faith-based lens is what you're saying, and that informs her worldview.
That informs her worldview. So when you are in that kind of environment and seeing people without the encumbrances of protection and armor, and you're understanding that mom is sick, or dad has 2 jobs, or you went to the doctor, you can't get an answer, you went to the VA and you got the runaround. When you see people and their problems where they are free to express them and free to talk about them, not as a complaint, but as a fact of their lives, then you come to this sense of, how do I help? What's my role? How do I minister to them in a way that helps them to get past this hurdle, helps them to navigate the hurdle, helps them to see God in this hurdle. And then we all move forward and rejoice together when we're on the other side of it.
Help me out on the personal salvation aspect of this. You're obviously, as a pastor, this idea that, well, I say this idea in the Bible, it talks about Jesus plus nothing. I mean, it's Jesus or nothing. Mm-hmm. How do you see, whether it be, and Kamala Harris can speak for herself, but How do you see her relationship with Jesus as it relates to the personal salvation aspect of this?
You know, I'm not a pastor who goes around asking people, are you saved? I had a lot of those in our church. And I have a nephew who would walk around and say, you better get saved. I'm not that person.
Why is that, would you say?
Because I think those things are very personal to people. And particularly when I have friends, acquaintances whose language, whose actions already mesh with my understanding of what a salvation experience would look like, then I don't feel the need to ask that. And so I would let her quantify and explain that for herself. What I know is what I see and what I experience with her, which are the actions of someone who understands what it is to have a higher goal, to be living a life that is not measured by the worldly standard of how much money you make and how many houses you accumulate, how many cars you have, but is measured by how do I help people? How do I drive people to a larger value of satisfaction, of fulfillment? And so for that reason, that's how I, in my interaction with her, say, this sounds like the mothers in the church. How you doing, baby? What's going on? What's happening with your husband, wife, with whoever it is? And how can I help? Because the salvation experience creates a change in your life, or it should. A change that moves you from the individualistic focus on what's happening with your own self to doing what Jesus did and look toward the world. And look toward the cares of the people in the world and the cares of the people who were his sheep and those who were not. He said, I've got 10,000 that have never bowed a knee. But Jesus' concern was for all of them, regardless of whether they shared the faith or not. And so when I talk with her and I see what drives her and I see what moves her and I see what her priorities are, it sounds like that to me.
Help me out a little bit. You said in the past that Jesus isn't on the ballot, but his values are, is what you said. So take me through that a little bit, because you're laying out many wonderful, compassionate gospel values, and then you have the other side, if you will, and I hate to put it like that, but folks that are more in the traditional pro-life, traditional marriage, genders, not wanting to see 100 and plus genders, you know what I'm trying to, all the cultural stuff that's going on today. How do you kind of sift through that? Because you're saying Jesus is not on the ballot, his values are, but you got two different camps seeing two different sets of values, and either one may not be nefarious at all.
Well, for me, to your point, it depends on how you define the values, right? So for me, I look to the scripture where Jesus' concern was for the children, Jesus' concern was for the poor, concern was for justice in the temple. And so when you play that out in terms of policy and take the rest of the scripture as well, are we feeding children? Are we caring for mothers and fathers, the widow, the orphan, the stranger? Are we doing these things in our everyday life? How are we holding government accountable? How are we holding our religious leaders accountable? And for me, those are the values I'm looking at as a society. I'm less concerned about the bathrooms and all of that. And I have nephews and nieces, and I understand people want their children to be safe. I get that part. So I want them to be safe everywhere. I want them to be well fed. So I want my government, when I say his values are we supporting candidates who want children to have school lunch? If their parents can't afford it, shouldn't there be school lunch? I can't say I support life as a construct, but then I want to cut school lunch. But then I don't want to provide health care for people who need it and who can't afford it.
Right.
I don't want to take care of pregnant mothers. I don't want to help folks get homes. Then it seems to me you have a contradiction in how we're defining life. Or you're in favor of the death penalty. Well, if you're for life, then you got to be for life the whole way. And so I'm looking at those values, at my faith in totality, and looking at how Jesus talked about it and how God talks about it in the rest of the text through the Old Testament. What is it that God cares about, and where does God spend time and attention? That's where I want to be focused.
Yeah, so more like womb to tomb, if you will, all the way through, so to speak. I hate that phrase, but you know what I'm saying. But what about the pro-lifers that are, conservative? They're pro-lifers. They see that God cares about life. We know God cares about life, but not just womb to tomb, but that they believe He cares about the unborn. Go to Jeremiah and some other passages there. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with people, seeing it that way, in a loving way, or because you're kind of focused in one area, but other people are focused in another area?
I think people are entitled to their opinions, and I don't assign nefarious intent if people choose to be pro-life. But what I often say to many of my pro-life friends is you have to be pro-life, not pro-birth. Right, so if you're pro-life, it's a totality.
All the way through.
All the way through. You can't just stop at have the baby, and then you don't care if mother, child, mom, dad are doing well, that they have somewhere to take the baby to. It has to be a whole arc of life. But beyond that, I think often we get we're misunderstood in this. I don't know that my position is more about people being able to make their decisions. And I'm not so much fighting for your right to have an abortion as I am fighting for your right to make that choice for yourself. I think in the biggest, most important thing in our lives, whether to choose God or not, whether to accept salvation or not, God gives us a choice. God allows us to make that decision for ourselves, knowing that any decision we make, there are consequences. But God gives us a choice. Who am I to take choice from other people?
For sure. Let me ask you the last couple questions. A little bit political in nature, but related to Kamala Harris. What's happening, do you believe, with what they call the black vote in America? We've seen this. Every poll, I cover politics for a living. I see it in poll after poll. The numbers, she's leading by a lot among black women and black men, but those numbers have decreased, especially since, it was Obama and then Hillary and then Biden and now Kamala, and it's not quite there. It's definitely not there. What do you attribute that to? What's happening within, and I hate to say kind of like the black community because it's so vast and so diverse, but something is happening, especially in the younger, under 50, black men under 50. What's going on there? How do you read that exactly? In other words, what she needs to do to kind of get that number up more than it is, because this election is going to be won at the margins.
So I think a couple of things. One, I'd remove Obama's election from the equation because that is outlier.
Yeah, I hear you.
Historic nature.
That's fine.
That's just, you can't even use that as a benchmark. If you look at the others, and NBC did a poll, showed some numbers on this the other day, where Harris is right now is exactly where Biden was at the same time, right? The 80s. That. So it's, there's, I don't know how much of a anomaly she is. I think people are still making up their minds. For what reason, I do not know. People seem to be still undecided. That said, there is a generational shift, particularly with younger voters who don't have the experience of the civil rights movement. When I was born, I didn't have the right to vote. So I got the right to vote 3 years later, after I was 3 or 4 years old, and we finally got the right to vote. So I grew up in an environment where I remember where my parents could tell me about not being able to vote. My grandparents who'd grown up in the South, not being able to vote. So this idea of voting and making your voice heard and aligning with a party that seemed to, of Lyndon Johnson, who got us the right to vote, the Kennedys, and on, got the weekend, the healthcare, all of that was just something that you did because of the history. Now you have a generation that doesn't have that lived experience. It's something they've read about, and so it's a tougher sell, if you will, to make to those. But I also think that, and this is true every cycle for both parties and the third and fourth parties. You got to earn every vote. You got to make your case. In this smaller world with the internet, where people can look up their own information and people can make their own decisions, you have more information available to you than ever before in the history of the world. People are doing their own research. The misinformation and disinformation campaigns, you got to earn every vote. Every candidate has to get out there and ask for and earn the votes of the people who they want the votes from. And I think that's true of both parties, of all the parties, Jill Stein and all Cornel West and whoever. You got to ask.
Yeah.
And people have a higher bar, and because there's so much more information available. And you're seeing that, I think, right now with all of the skepticism. Now, it remains to be seen for me on election day what really happens and whether the skepticism that's been reported among black men really bears out in what they do when they go to the polls. We'll see.
Let me ask you one last political question. You know, you wear so many hats, former DNC chair and Howard Dean's former campaign's chief of staff. Barack Obama, so was America ready to elect a black president? And the answer, clearly yes. What about here? What about a female black president? Or do you have your concerns, or do you wonder deep down about that in this country today?
I do, because I'm a black woman. And so I'm keenly aware of the challenges that we face in this American experiment every day. I think women in general, we couldn't elect Hillary Clinton. You know, when 53% of white women vote for the white guy and not for the white woman, and then you just go, okay. And she was clearly, at least in my opinion, far better qualified in terms of experience, at least, you know, you could go through a list. I think America in general still struggles with sexism, still struggles with misogyny. And racism too, but we've never had a female leader in the way that our peer countries have around the world, England, Germany. We just haven't been able to do it, and I think that speaks to something perhaps in our history as a country that keeps us from making that final leak and finally crashing that big glass ceiling. Now, as a black woman, you know, I'm concerned about whether America's ready to elect a woman, but I'm also concerned about whether America's ready to elect a black woman. I think we struggle still as black women in this country. All doors are not open. All doors are not readily unlocked. We still make far less on the dollar to men, black or white. And we have a lot of challenges. Our maternity mortality rates are high. We aren't listened to in doctors' offices. We aren't diagnosed properly. So our cancer rates, death by cancer, are astronomically higher than anybody else in this country. So there are a lot of obstacles that we face. The fact that you need legislation called the Crown Act to allow black women to wear their hair any way they want to wear their hair without repercussions in the workplace tells you something about how we're seen in general, and that people in many states in this country can be fired for wearing their hair in its natural state. That's kind of problematic.
As we wrap up, what's your prayer for Kamala Harris? What's your prayer for the country? What's on your heart specifically in both of those cases?
Over these last 8 years or so, I have watched the increased polarization of America. And I don't know that it wasn't there, it's just more blatant. It's out of the shadows. And that's a shame, and so I worry for our children of all races, from all parts of the country, how they're growing up in this environment where we are so knee-jerk red, blue, black, white, brown. And these are the people who are going to lead this nation. I worry about them. I don't have children, but I'm the best auntie in the world. And I'm concerned about my nephews and my niece and what they're seeing and what they're hearing and what that means for the future of America. So my prayer for our country is that we will come to a reckoning moment, that we will perhaps have our own God moment where we can lay down all of the things that keep us divided and separated, where we can lay down the need to bully and to blame somebody for whatever our challenges of the moment will be, that we will understand who we're raising and what our today actions will mean for those who will lead this nation tomorrow. That is my prayer for our country and for Kamala and for all those who step forward to offer themselves as leaders. I pray that they will have wisdom for the moment and that they will display the marks of true leadership, which is to move people forward and to understand that their example and what they're modeling, we follow. If you're a leader and nobody's following you, you're just out for a walk. So you've got these people who are stepping forward to say, I will lead. How are you leading? What messages are you sending to those who are following? And will those messages help those people to be better? Help them to grow into their destiny? Help them to grow into what God designed for them before the foundation of time? And if it's not, if all the messages are negative and downgrading, then maybe it's time to pass the leadership torch. So my prayer for them is wisdom for the moment, vision of what we can be, what God is calling us to be, and the strength to lead us toward that.
By the way, I detect an emotion in that answer. This is, if not personal for you, it is personal, but it feels like it's really heartfelt, like it's raw.
Yeah, you know, when you go out, I've been traveling a lot lately, and you go out and you just see people, and I think one of the things that really moved me is I saw a news special of 9 and 10-year-olds talking about the candidates, and the visceral reaction that they were having to the candidates. And my first question was, why are you even paying attention to this? You're 9.
Right.
What is happening in your household that you are able to describe the candidates with such visceral emotion and disdain and distrust? And it made me really upset and really sad, because we are creating this in our children. What will our nation become?
Pastor Daughtry, thank you so much.
Thank you.